Welcome to Art Traffic. Let's get going.
Here and there, you might take a break or whatever, go do a podcast, you know, and then go back to the studio and hit it. You know, it's nice.
This week we have Gerardo Monterrubio. Gerardo is a ceramic-based artist whose work really relies heavily on drawing and painting on the ceramic object. He does 3 basic bodies of work right now that he calls ceramic slabs, which you'll hear him talk about quite a bit in the episode, and vessels and figurative works. All of them are elaborately decorated, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing him talk. He is incredibly passionate about his work, and if you need a shot in the arm to get going and get out there, this is the guy to give it to you. Here's our episode with Gerardo Monterrubio.
So my name is Gerardo Monterrubio, and I was born in Oaxaca in Mexico in 79.
Oh, no kidding.
And then in 89 I came to LA. So I spent my childhood in Oaxaca, and then I spent the rest of my years here in LA. And so I lived in different parts of LA. I think we started like in MacArthur Park, near that area. And then we moved to like Pico Union and all kinds of different neighborhoods in LA when I was young and growing up. And then we ended up in Hollywood, and I mostly spend my time in Hollywood. And now I live in East LA. Been there 6 years now. And so
So you're in East LA, not in like Boyle Heights or
I'm in the
Montebello
east
or
of
any
East
of that
LA.
stuff.
Yeah, I'm in the east of East LA.
Yeah.
So it's like
there's a lot of like distinctions. Like there's a lot of like neighborhood distinctions.
Yeah,
in
I'm
East
by
LA.
Vincent Price. I tell people.
Oh,
you know,
okay,
like,
yeah,
because,
sure,
you know,
yeah.
you get I'm like, oh, Vincent Price. Yeah, I'm like 4 blocks away. So I'm in a really nice place where well, that neighborhood had it had an infamy for like gang violence and things like that. But when we bought the place in 2012, I looked at the crime record and it was like green. You know, like the worst thing that would happen to someone, it's like they got their car broken into and they took some coins or something like that, right?
happens
Like once a year.
everywhere, right?
Yeah. And then where I was living, it was like a red zone. There was like rape, murder, all kinds of things. So but because of the reputation that the neighborhood has, we were able to get a really good and wide place. But I'm close to everything. I'm next to Montebello. I'm next to Monterey Park and Alhambra. So I'm good. I'm next to all the good food, you know?
Yeah.
Alhambra. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. And so I went to school up the street in Cal State Long Beach. I did my undergrad there. I started at ACC. And then I went to UCLA for grad school. And I got into ceramics, into clay, a little bit at LACC. And then I went into painting and drawing for a bit. But then when I got into the ceramics program at Cal State Long Beach, that's when I just sort of like took on clay full on.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that for 10 years now or something like that. I think about what I'm doing with clay. I think about how it's somewhat of a universal medium because every culture has sort of dealt with what image to put on their pieces, right? And so that's kind of where I get, I don't know if it's inspiration, but that's kind of my lineage, I think.
Yeah.
It's a universal sort of like impulse to put something that relates to your world on the surface of a vessel. You know, all the cultures have done that. And so I'm just here doing the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that body of work, I think, it started at up the street here. And I started doing that on porcelain. I started doing forms where the forms had a direct relationship to the narrative, to the drawings. So the forms, they were informed by I guess you could say my observations of my world and my world during my formative years, I think. So
Yeah, this guy will show up. This is what allows me to own this house. It makes it inexpensive to live right there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what was it?
So you were informed early on by the ceramics and the history of the markings that were put onto vessels.
Well, when I started the body of work that I consider or that I have adopted as my work, because I've done many bodies of work before that are in obscurity, but the ones that I have that I claim as my own, I started it with the idea of making something that was that was recognizable, that people could like walk into a space and say like, oh yeah, I recognize that, you know, it's Gerardo's work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I wanted something. I wanted like this. I wanted the work to kind of I wanted the work to have a, and it, I don't know how this sounds, but I wanted to do something that was authentic,
Yeah.
authentic to me.
Yeah.
And so these, as I was saying earlier, these forms are informed by observations from both of these worlds where I grew up. So some of the imagery comes from a lot of my observations during my childhood, and others come from observations of the different neighborhoods here in LA. Okay, and and I think from the earlier pieces up until now, I've noticed that I've always sort of been exploring a few different themes, like how people form belief systems, how people derive value from those belief systems, how people derive meaning, and with the earlier pieces, you find those themes throughout that body of work. And initially, I was working with porcelain, and porcelain, it's one of these materials that is really difficult to work with because you have to dry it slowly. You have to. Well, at the time, I didn't know how to work with clay that much, so I would have to make solid forms, take molds out of these forms,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
allow the thing to dry. If the thing made it out of the mold, out of the drying, and out of the first firing, then I would go and draw on it with black and white imagery. And I think the black and white imagery that I started with at first was informed by what I had considered to be art when I was younger. So like prison tattoos, prison drawings, and so my first pieces were informed by that, and also by murals. The way that murals sort of like fill the whole wall, the whole space,
Yeah.
and they tell a story, or every image has a meaning within that frame. And so what I was doing with these forms, they were almost like little mini murals that would allow the viewer to go into the piece and walk around the piece and maybe kind of stop at a certain point of the piece.
This is gonna be a big one. Sorry.
So with these earlier pieces, I was thinking of them as the way people engage with like murals, right?
Yeah.
I think at the time I was going back to Mexico like every year, so I was going to Mexico City and just kind of viewing as much of those murals that I could, and that definitely sort of influenced my work. But what I really loved about working three-dimensionally versus two-dimensionally is that you could take advantage of the form, because you could put one image on one side, and to continue viewing that image, the viewer has to walk around, and then that creates a different connection to a different image that's waiting for them at the corner, and then it's sort of like an experience. And what I found with a lot of those pieces is that I could hide certain images here and there. And so I always get the responses from viewers of like, oh, the more you look at it, the more things that you find. So a lot of these pieces kind of stop you and kind of like make you kind of think about what it is that you're looking at. And people have different interpretations of the pieces. It's never clear. And I think titles have always been like a way to a key to go into the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from the beginning I used titles as a way in, as a hook. But porcelain, because it's very delicate and it takes a long time for the piece to dry. Sometimes I would have an idea, and I would think that idea was a really good idea. I would make the form, but by the time that the form dried and it was ready to go after the first firing, that idea was not fresh anymore. So then I came to sort of like a place where I wanted to question my work, and I wanted to sort of see what else I can do without that strategy.
Yeah.
But also, I was also questioning a lot of not only what I was doing in the pieces, but what I was doing as an artist. Like basically, I was questioning. I had this existential sort of crisis. Not, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but I was just really sort of like questioning why I was even making art in the first place.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
was just like, okay, like there's people out there that are like
Sure.
doing some real shit, like saving people's lives and, you know, or whatever, you
Right,
know,
right.
curing cancer or trying to cure cancer and things
Right.
like that. And like for someone of my background, I think I was expected to like go on to like law school or medical school with the opportunities that I had been given,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm here drawing on porcelain from fucking mud, right? And so I was like,
So there's some expectations.
so there was definitely, I definitely had the pressure of justifying what I was doing to myself, really. And so I started questioning why I was in this world anyway, why I was making art. A long time ago though, I had decided, regardless of like money, right? Like
Yeah.
that wasn't gonna be an issue for me.
Yeah.
And but then when I was questioning that further, why I was going into this thing that maybe was not going to make money, and it wasn't going to be, it was like a risky career for me.
Sure. Yeah.
I came to the conclusion that one of the things that I value and that I've always valued, I think, it's time and how I spend my time and who I spend my time with. And so art was sort of like a way to have a valid way of spending that time. And in a sense, by spending that time in creating art, I was going to have an autonomous existence. I was going to live sort of I was going to spend my time according to my own rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was questioning that further to see where the source of this sort of like stubbornness was coming from. And then I thought about my grandfather, who in his youth, he also did whatever he wanted. He also had this freedom to do whatever he wanted. He had this sense of autonomy. He had this sense of authority. When he was young, he was a bull rider. And he did that not for money. He probably did it for a little bit of fame, but he did it for the thrill. He did it because it was like an expression of who he was.
Yeah.
So I thought about like how that desire to have this autonomous existence also paralleled this idea of what it meant to be a man. So it meant that these two ideas were very close to each other, ideas of manhood and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of these ideas were quite beautiful, you know, thinking about, like I said, those values that I got from that culture. You know, your word, it's like the most valuable thing, or you have to take care of like your family, respect for your elders. But a lot of it was also quite, I would say, a bit toxic. And I was noticing that at that time because I had just bought that house. We had just bought that house in 2012 at the bottom of the market. And we moved to this neighborhood in East LA. And so I was kind of playing this role, this nonverbal role, when I would step out into the porch and I would look at other men of the house, and I sort of knew how to behave nonverbally.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah,
to have
yeah.
like a place within that sort of like infamous neighborhood, you could say.
Uh-huh.
And then so I started noticing that this non-verbal language that I was using was the same language that my grandfather was using, or my uncles were using, or those things. So it sort of came intuitively to me,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew how to use that language from my youth also, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that and a lot of other things that created those paradigms were malleable, because at the same time I was at UCLA. So when I would drive to UCLA, there was a lot of kids that were non-binary,
Sure.
and so it was a totally different way of communicating and of interacting and of getting along, basically.
Yeah.
And so I would go back to East LA, and it would be the same, like
different worlds again.
different
Yeah.
again. And it's like, all right, so when I was going to Mexico too, when I was, when I would go and talk to my uncles, my cousin or whatever, they would, we would go drinking or whatever, right, until we're like really wasted. And
Uh-huh.
it was like little things, like my cousin would be like, let me see your hands, like, oh, little fucking hands,
I
like,
know
oh,
these ones. Yeah, I know
you're
these
a
ones.
fucking
Yeah.
writer, you're a fucking oh, I see, these are real fucking man hands, you see that? And then he
Yeah.
would point to my uncle, who's he was an electrician or whatever, and he was
Yeah.
climbing poles or whatever, it's a
Right.
man,
Yeah.
so they were equating a lot of manual labor with manhood, right?
Yeah.
And the same body language was also being used by the workers that I had hired to remodel the house that I had just bought, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were tearing up the house, and they had these ideas too,
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to create something that came from these vehicles that carried verbal and nonverbal ideas of masculinity. And so one of the first pieces that I created was this piece called Vale Madrismo, which comes from Valer Madre. Valer Madre, it's a if you could translate it, it's not a literal translation, but the closest one is like to live your life without giving a fuck. Really, it's kind of like a risky way of comforting the world with your chest up and
Yeah.
And so because I was thinking of how also language, colloquial sort of platitudes also carry or function as vehicles for these masculine ideals, just like the nonverbal ones do. And so I created this piece, this figure, because I'm really traditional. So I went back to the figure and I did this figure, mostly made out of ceramic, but it was also done with the materials from the construction that they were digging out of my house, and with toxic oils and things like that.
Yeah.
And this piece had to have this like fist close, and it had a bunch of scars
Mm-hmm.
that in order for clay not to crack during the firing, when you're working large, you have to compress it. You have to hit it with a stick. And so, because I was thinking of language, another colloquial thing that came to mind was the saying, "Hay que aguantar vara." And so this "hay que aguantar vara" means it's understood, like people that grow up in a culture that uses violence to correct behavior, they know that saying. And so I wanted the piece to have these marks of the stick as scars, and these scars that like sort of carry the piece forward. And another piece that I did was an abstraction of a bull, and this bull hung from the ceiling with this rope that is used to
Lasso,
pull cattle, the
yeah,
lassos,
yeah.
during like the jaripeos, the bull riding events. And in these bull riding events, they have this like, well, before they used to have like this wind music with the bands playing, and then it's really exciting, the trumpets and the bass and all that. And then young men sort of like they sort of prove their manhood by riding this bull, this huge bull that could literally kill them, right? And a lot of the times they do.
Yeah.
But it's quite exciting. It's a really exciting event. But it's terrifying. It could be terrifying at the same time. And so I wanted to put all these signifiers in the piece. It was really important for the piece not to have any cracks, because un hombre no se raja. It's another colloquial. A man doesn't crack, right? Jalisco no te rajes. It's like little things that I think the Mexican culture would understand, right?
Yeah.
And then, so this piece was this abstraction of a bull, and it was like the colors of like a fighting rooster. You know, it was
Yeah,
hanging from
yeah.
a ceiling. And the title of the piece, it was El Corrido de Don Gustavo Martinez Garcia, which is my grandfather. So people that know what a corrido is, they know that it's a genre of music. And if the people that know the history of that music, they know that ever since, you know, the Mexican Revolution up till now, it's always been about ideals of what it means to be heroic as a man, or what it means to be a man, a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's about horses or roosters or whatever. And now it's about decapitating the snitches that betray you in the narco wars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, the title was a key into sort of understanding the piece, right? The corrido of then my grandfather's name. Well, this piece hung from the ceiling. Underneath, there was a different piece, and it was uh, a heap of terracotta bottles, of different bottles of beer, alcohol, different types of alcohol, including rubbing alcohol. And on the surface of these bottles, instead of doing drawings as I usually did in other pieces, I wrote down conversations that I had with my grandmother. And it was like I didn't want to contaminate her experience, but I wanted to write it down.
Yeah.
And it was done in this colloquial sort of like between Zapotec and Spanish, because my grandmother was fluent in Zapotec. So I wrote down all these stories, and the viewer couldn't really formulate a story by reading this because they were blocked by
It was
other
obscure,
bottles.
yeah.
But you could kind of get a glimpse of what it might have been to be an indigenous woman in her times in Mexico, growing up under the shadow of this patriarchy.
Yeah.
And then, so of course, these bottles are in the shape of the Pachamama, which is like, you know, the Mother Earth. And they were laid on top of this dirt that was a mixture of some of the dirt from their first house that they bought. I brought it back here. I mixed it with some of the dirt from my house. And then I took that dirt and I fired it, and I called it Tierra Bendita, just like Agua Bendita, which is holy water. You take a little bit of holy water, throw it in some big holy water, and now the whole thing is holy. And so I always wanted to do something with my grandmother's dirt, and then that's what I did, because I noticed that art had become what the religion was to my grandmother. My grandmother and my grandfather were very devoted Catholics, yeah. And so the way that they would go to, they would take pilgrimages to go listen to an expert talk about religion or whatever. I do the same thing, you know. So I would travel to go look at an exhibition, go listen to an expert talk about art and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about all these ideas in the context of why I was making art in the first place, but also examining like the parallels between ideals of masculinity and ideals of
Is there a parallel between what your grandfather was doing as a bull rider and what you're doing as an artist, as far as like you were explaining earlier about like having an attitude of like living your life, I guess, sort of like without a care, you know? Is that the parallels, is the intergenerational parallel of the two men that do things for maybe for a thrill?
Well, I think none of us, and I mean the grandkids and the sons, none of us could parallel my grandfather in the way that he lived his life.
Why
because I mean, he was a badass, you know. He rode he was known, first of all.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he
So
was
he
known. He had a
developed
reputation. Fame, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he was good at what he did. And I mean, I wouldn't get on a bull. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of things that I wouldn't do. That
But you could be the artistic equivalent in your own right.
And I think the only parallel is that I think what I got from my grandfather is like, you know, he sort of lived his life according to his own rules, and in a sense, by going into this field, I am able to spend my time the way that I wanted to spend it, rather than being in a cubicle. Like I would probably be suicidal if if I had to be in a cubicle for 9 hours or whatever,
right,
corporate, whatever,
sure,
whatever.
yeah,
I probably couldn't do that. I just
No.
couldn't do that. It would be against my idea of humanity.
yeah,
And so the only parallel I think it would be like that I'm doing, that I'm sort of doing what I want to do,
yeah.
to a certain degree.
That's in your DNA, huh?
I think so. I think so because, and I think that, I think because I didn't grow up under that patriarchy, is ironically is why, because I have a distance, right? I could see it from a distance,
Yeah,
and so I could kind of take certain lessons from that experience and apply it to my own sort of existence,
yeah,
without being controlled by that shadow, that overpowering patriarchy. So if I would have stayed in Mexico, like I said, I would have gone into medicine or law, and maybe I would have been really successful at it. But here, I sort of had a different route. My life took on a different route,
yeah,
and here I am, doing something that I think it's quite fulfilling. I wouldn't say that it's like the most joyous thing, but it's because it's not easy.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
for
easy.
sure.
It's not easy making art, right?
Mm-mm.
It's easy to draw, but I think to make art out of drawings, it's the trick. So and that's the thing that I sort of like, that I wrestle with, and it's a good fight.
Yeah,
It's a good challenge, I think.
yeah,
So those three pieces that I mentioned were pieces that were successful. I had done other pieces that weren't so successful, and then I did a couple of other pieces that also that related to the ideals of masculinity here in LA. So I did a bust. I went back to the drawing board, and I did a bust of a full tattoo face and I called it Scooby West Side Wife Ends. And I did it in sort of like thinking about one of a really good friend I had in my childhood who's no longer around. He's doing 50 years in Pelican Bay. And so the way that I was imagining him with his face full of tattoos, his face being like a shield that you couldn't really penetrate. You can't even, you probably can't even look at that person in the eye. But this skin that's full of imagery, it's almost like this cry, or these things that cannot be expressed in words.
Your ideas are blowing me away, by the way. Like, I didn't know that you could fire dirt. Like, there's so many things that you're just blowing me away with right now. So, like, yeah, just keep going. So you have this friend, and he has this face of tattoos and the imagery of that.
Well, this is the way that because it had been such a long time, right? That I haven't seen him in decades, right, or years, more than a decade. But what I'm saying, I was thinking about thinking about certain choices I made. Like, he and I were in the same shoes at one point. You know, we're kind of like in the streets at one point. He was like my brother at one point, and so he made some choices, I think, that landed him where he is now, and I made slightly different choices that have me here talking to you today.
Yeah.
But those choices were just a little bit different. There was not that much difference, but a huge different
the effect
outcome.
was giant,
huge. And so I was thinking about those things. I was thinking about all the things that I had learned from, or the people that I had learned things from. And then I did, next to this piece, I did a different piece of a sidewalk.
That contrast is just amazing to me right now. I have to step back a minute and just be just like, you went to one of the most prestigious colleges in America. You know? And then one of your best friends is in Pelican Bay.
Right.
That gap is like insane,
Yeah.
And to imagine that is just two branches of the same tree, it's an incredible thought to think that you were there together at that moment, and what could have possibly happened to bring you guys into such different realms. It's an exclusive place you were in. Like, not very many people get to go there.
And the thing about, I think it's just that I learned early on to flip the page, really, because
How did you do that?
that's the only way that you survive, basically, right? Like, I mean, I had a bunch of cousins, aunts, uncles, my grandparents, huge family in Mexico, and then one day it was just me and my mom, and that's it. We couldn't go back.
Yeah.
So, and I did a piece based on this. It's called assimilation. So through the process of assimilating, all those family members, in a sense, died because I couldn't have contact with them. I couldn't go back to see them for a long time, for more than a decade. And then so through that process, it's almost like they had this metaphorical death.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote their name on this piece of this skull, right? The cow skull, a family crossing the desert, and so that was in 2009. So I was already kind of thinking about these ideas from way back then, and so you just kind of have to learn to flip the page. You know what I mean? And I think the chapter where Scooby and I were in the same page, I flipped it because most people that were in that page, they did not have a good outcome. A lot of those people, I mean, Scooby's just one of them. A lot of people are not around anymore. From that world.
Yeah.
But that was my world at one point, and it was something that, it's a world that made who I am today, and it makes me appreciate the little things of today, to know that there's people that are not getting that chance, that came from that chapter, in my world. So the other piece that was next to Scooby was this piece of sidewalk that I recreated. And it relates kind of like to those choices that I made, where the sidewalk had an image. It was from a neighborhood on Normandy and 8th, where I lived around 90 to 93, around that era. And of course, it was the era of gangster rap. It was the era of the LA riots. That's where I experienced the LA riots.
And the Crips and Bloods were
warring
really hard. Yeah.
The Mara Salvatrucha was there. 18th Street Drive was like a common scene.
Yeah.
But my mom was at work, the whole week, so I would stay by myself, really. But like in Mexico, you go out the whole day, during summer vacations, and I did the same thing, but it was a neighborhood where you're not supposed to be out.
Yeah.
But it was this beautiful neighborhood because it's like people are hanging out in the fireplaces. There's like community.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of places in LA where community happens, where there's not a fucking mall or something, like some shopping shit, or
you have to fulfill your role in making commerce happen at all times, right?
But that street, there was nothing. I mean, if anything, there was the paleteros selling like ice cream, or like ladies selling tamales or whatever, but or the atole or and so this street,
and MacArthur Park, which you mentioned before, it's one of those places.
It's one of those places where like you hear music on a Sunday morning,
and people are just hanging out
in the balcony, hanging out on the street, and but so it was a beautiful neighborhood with a really beautiful rhythm, but it was dangerous because there was always shootings there. And so when I would pass, one of the memories that I have, one of the vivid memories, aside from the ones from the LA riots, was this quite subtle and simple memory of a fresh blood stain that I would often see in front of this liquor store on 8th Street.
Mm-hmm.
The liquor store is still there. And I think that neighborhood has changed a lot. I think they film movies, whatever. But this blood stain on this sidewalk was always fresh there from the weekend. And it was an experience that, like, the people that I live with, because we share, like, 20 people in a single apartment or whatever, because everybody has 2 jobs or whatever. Sure, so no one's really there. People just go in and out to sleep. And so these people are always getting robbed by the neighborhood gangsters, and so these are the 2 sort of role models, right? Like the paisas that go to work on a second or third shift in a restaurant, and then the gangsters who have all the money, all the girls, all the power, really. And so it was like an enticing sort of like way to go in and have an automatic different existence with a lot of money and, like I said, pretty girls. and whatnot. But that blood stain, I think it's the thing that sort of like kept me away from that, from going deep into that. And I was little too, so they wouldn't fuck with me because we were like the lookouts basically, and they would and they would be doing their thing or whatever. But I saw there was a lot of freedom in that neighborhood. We would go to different pools or whatever. But that blood stain on the sidewalk, I think it's the thing that kept me from going in that direction. And instead of going into this gangbanging, I chose graffiti because I was more inclined into making art and into the fame of making art, into going throughout the city and people know your name and people know who you are. And I had that reputation when I was a youngster, when I was little. And so this sidewalk piece was about that neighborhood, and it's mostly scenes from like the LA riots, and it's mostly scenes from this quite dark but festive neighborhood that's really sort of rich contradiction, you know, as is life, you know. And so after this body of work that explore these themes or these parallels, I continued working with porcelain, but I started introducing color with porcelain. But instead of making forms that related to the narrative, I started making what I call blank. So they were like torso-like structures. They were like vessels. They had a lot of that texture from the vara, yeah. And it's just ironic that, you know, aguantar vara, it's a stoic sort of way of thinking about life, that you have to be a stoic in the way that you sort of deal with shit that life throws at you.
And you have to expect it.
You expect it.
Yeah, and when it happens, you're not surprised.
You're not surprised. You're just like, oh, yeah, I could do this shit. Like, it's fine, you know, whatever.
This is weird how much Irish Catholics are like, your upbringing. This sounds real familiar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And Guinness is better, though. Than
I don't know. Like, we could...
Definitely.
Maybe one day we'll have a taste testing. We'll figure it all out.
Guinness definitely is better. Any day. So what was I going to say? So these blanks continue to explore these notions, right? These ideals, these vehicles for masculine identities. And so there was a lot of contradictions. There was a lot of different ideas that I was exploring. But my goal was, with these blanks, was to basically not necessarily have a theme, because I didn't want to also get stuck with the theme. I wanted to be more free-flowing.
Sure, yeah.
And I think at the time I had discovered the work of Hans Josephson, this German sculptor. And when I saw his work, it was just like, the texture, the whole thing, it was just like, yes. Like, it was perfect. I'd never seen one in person, but it was just like, oh my God, you know, this is the work that speaks to you from a guttural level, from a very visceral level. Yeah. And so I was really, really influenced. The forms were influenced by his work. And then I had these blanks that I could then kind of like dream up whatever I wanted to dream up and draw on them and just kind of explore color. And with some pieces, I did explore color to a certain degree. And then I think I left color. Gradually, I was putting glazes on the corner of a piece somewhere, celebrating the things that I love about ceramics, the surprising element of a glaze that runs, that bleeds into an image, that pulls and maybe cracks the piece a little bit. And then, so I tried to do, like, to choose colors of the glazes that had to do with the theme or the narrative of that one piece. For instance, I did a piece towards La Zona Pelucida. We were trying to have a baby at the time, and I think I went to Minneapolis and I saw the work of the Propeller Group. It was a video that I probably saw back to back like 5 times. It's like a 30 or 40 minute video. I think it's called The Dead Need Light, The Living Need Music, something like that. Funeral Rituals. And I saw this one image of this female that was wearing, I think she was naked, and she was wearing a skull head, a cow skull head. And for some reason that image captured a little bit of the essence of that whole video. And so that image ended up in that one piece, and they were sort of like, you know, the immune system like fucking up the sperm that were trying to get to the Zona Pelucida. So it was like a playful piece, and then the glaze there was like a a glaze that imitated cum. It's kind of white and glossy, but luscious and beautiful. And so there's all this death and sex. I was thinking about those two things, and because we were thinking about pregnancy, at the time. And so I did a few pieces that had a lot of different influences, from different people and from different artists, definitely.
And your themes are your themes are dramatic. They're like the big issues of life. They're almost operatic. It's just like the sex, death, fame. I mean? It's like these bit like Shakespearean almost kind of themes. Is that ever like an influence of yours, like that? Is that are you drawn to the big issues, I would have to say?
Yes, definitely. And those are usually kind of influenced by whatever is going on, either in the world that I'm observing, the world that I'm living in. So, I had so a death happened in the family, and then I did a piece that had to do with this ideas about the afterlife. So my grandma passed away that year, and I did a piece called Puño de Tierra. And Puño de Tierra, it's one of these songs that captures the essence of what it means to live a really rich and valuable life, and that you have to kind of celebrate. Hay que darle gusto al gusto. You have to give pleasure to pleasure, because when you leave, you only take a fistful of dirt. And so what I was thinking, all that shit related to what I was telling you earlier about this autonomous existence and art. My reason for making art, for making this piece. And so this was my grandmother's favorite song, because that's kind of what, in her mind, that's how she lived her life. So this piece has a bunch of signifiers that have to do with belief systems, different belief systems. It has an image of a membrance plate. Yeah. This membrance plate has a little hole. There's an exhibit right now in LACMA with a bunch of these pieces, and they're perfect. They're perfect because you could only speculate on what the meaning of these pieces are. And one of these speculations is that, they were placed on the heads or the faces of the deceased, and a hole was poked through them so the soul could go out into the heavens, right? Mm-hmm. So the dome is like this heaven. And they had images that had to do with their world, with the little insects, with the little animals, the plant life, that may be related to rituals in their world. And so here I am putting images that relate to the rituals, to the burial rituals in my world. And I think one of the images was, I put my dogs there. 'Cause my grandmother I think had like a first grade education, but she used to tell my aunts and uncles, like, hey, like, be nice to the dog, because when you die, a dog's gonna get you to the other side, like, People are like, all right, whatever, grandma. Don't fucking, you never argue with grandma, right? You never say, okay, mom,
but
sorry.
That's a wild idea, grandma.
Yeah, like, okay, fuck, I think she's drunk, whatever, Well, it turns out that that's an ancient belief system, a pre-Columbian belief system. The Colima dogs are all about that, right? Like a dog, it's the one that's gonna help you. There's a legend that if you were good to these dogs in life, or animals in general, this dog is going to help you cross this river into the next level of life.
Love this, because I'm set then.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so good to the dogs. I rescue them. I feed them.
And anyway, so there was a bunch of scenes that had to do with that, and a cat's fucking killing a little bird, because cats are these fucking murderers.
Yeah, they're monsters.
They're gorgeous fucking murderers. I love cats too. But they're fucking hunters. They're natural. They're natural hunters.
Well, they're kind of sport hunters too.
Sport hunters. Yeah. They just do it for the.
Like, sometimes they're full. They don't need to eat, and they get out there and really just destroy some stuff in wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the legend with cats? What are they gonna what are they gonna do? Are they like, if you dead, right? If you're dead and a cat shows up, you're like, uh-oh.
It's not a bad way to go. I mean, you want to be buried in a box, I'd rather get eaten by cats or birds or something,
Yeah, well, at least your carbon, your biological matter would go into making something else.
Yeah.
Possible, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with that work, that piece. I'm really happy about that piece being acquired by LACMA recently, and so it's in their permanent collection. So I'm really kind of happy about that one
huge,
specific
right?
piece. Yeah, I didn't think I would. I thought I would be dead before if my work ever ended there. I thought, oh yeah, maybe when I die, but it's there.
Yeah, that's so
So
you still feel like you can't gain you still think you can't gain the kind of infamy that your grandfather did, even though you've got even though you have these accomplishments now?
I'm still trying to yeah, I don't know.
You're young. Especially
not that young.
No, well, especially for an artist. You're talking about artists becoming famous when they're dead. Well, a lot become famous, after
I'm not
50.
Famous. I'm not famous at all.
Well, hey man.
You're gonna make me famous with this podcast.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
No, this podcast is like definitely becoming an interesting archive of artists.
Yeah, I've been hearing it, and it's pretty interesting.
And I think that would be an important thing if the digital world continues to exist. And it sounds like a wild thing to say, but it's a very talking about your medium. You're making an artifact that could last thousands of years.
Yeah.
Where this stuff is brand new, and we don't know if this digital stuff is going to last, to be honest. Like if anyone knows history and is thinking about it, you have to know digital is incredibly ephemeral.
Yeah.
Anything online takes a lot of constant maintenance to keep it going. Whereas if you make a piece of earthenware that is fired at all properly, like doesn't have too many air pockets in it, I mean, like it's gonna survive.
Yeah.
Possibly hundreds of thousands of years.
I definitely.
What's that like? What's that like to make work that do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely, because I think I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think it's all about like making something, that says I was here or something,
Yeah, so that first.
I think it's just participating in culture, really,
Yeah, and those are like really different things. One is like that very primitive desire that you could find in like prehistoric cave paintings of just hands, or like we hunted this animal or whatever, what I mean, like real primitive need to say like we were a band, we existed, this is what we did. And then that other one of saying like I want to participate in this larger cultural event. Those are linked, but two different ideas,
Yeah.
And one has like a certain amount of like generosity, I feel like, to it, that one of like, I want to say my verse and have people maybe come to a greater understanding of who I am and who they are. It's a generous idea, in my opinion. And, the other one is more like a struggle to survive. It's like, it's that like, that same desire to have a child to me is like, I'm trying to push a copy of my DNA into the future, right?
But check this out. I just had a baby. She's 3.5 months, and nothing compares to. I mean, I'm sure you know nothing compares to
Sure.
having a baby. You know what I mean? Like,
It's crazy.
it's just like you're one person that before and after. You know, after it's like like changes your work
Oh yeah.
completely. You
My
know,
my artwork changed so
did it?
much.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I after my first child was born, like it seemed much less important to me,
Huh.
and I like the work itself. Like leading up to the birth, I had all this really vibrant work where I was doing these prints of my wife with her pregnancy and the child inside of her, and the neighborhood and the whole thing, and it was just very like like explosive time of creativity. And then after the child was born, I was just like sleep deprived and angry and just like I couldn't make anything. Like, so how's the last 3 months, man? You look fresh.
4 hours of sleep. No, it's
Yeah.
good. It's good. You know, a lot of beautiful interruptions because my studio's at home.
Yeah.
So I'm working out there, sometimes I'm really, really into my work, and then my girl comes with my baby, like they just hang out, and like, it's fucking sweet.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's beautiful, So I'm really lucky, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to think how much of it is luck, really, though.
That's true. That's true.
It's a really tough question. Some of it is decisions. Some of it seems to be somewhat like maybe you just had raw materials that lent themselves to doing what you've done, or creating an opportunity, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think maybe lucky is the wrong word. You're right. I think I'm grateful. I think because you're right. Right now I'm doing things. I'm taking steps for other opportunities. Now that I have a kid, now I'm thinking of other opportunities, other ambitions. So yeah, I don't know if luck has anything to do with it. I think it's a lot of hard work and a lot of planning and a lot of dedication and discipline and
yeah. So has the work changed though after the baby?
It's too soon, but so I guess it was already going in that direction, but after I did that one piece that I was speaking of earlier, I started doing a body of work of deities, different deities. And so I'm going to throw a bunch so I'm going back to the figure. So I go back and forth. I have 3 bodies of work right now. I have the deities. That's like the slow work. I'm doing more research. That's more like research-based work. And then I have the blanks. That's like cloud watching, as my friend would say. Or just, like free-flowing ideas that evolve and they inform each other, and then they end up sort of creating themselves. And then I have these little fast pieces. Because the deities are so slow, I had to have some fast pieces. So I created these little mounds of earthenware, and I was pressing them in certain places in my house at this point. And I'm gonna go to the river where I take my dogs and press some pieces there. And they're kind of like shrines, like little shrines. But these are just kind of quick drawings, quick paintings. And then I'm doing pit firing. So they're really dark right now, physically dark.
Yeah.
But also the content is a bit dark. So I'm thinking of obscurity with this body of work and an obscure image. And so that's what's cooking right now on the stove. These fast pieces, the deities, and then I have the blanks. And then, who knows where my work is gonna go? I have a feeling that I might go back to doing something like the previous body of work that doesn't involve drawing. So we'll see. I don't want to make predictions because then I contradict myself,
Yeah.
I just have to allow the work to sort of like, I sit there, I drink coffee or whatever. The work happens, or I take the dog for a run, and then the work happens that way. I never turn it off,
Yeah.
I'm asleep one day, and I think of something before I go to sleep, and then in the middle of the night, oh, that's a really good idea, and then sometimes a piece develops out of those moments. But And that's what I mean by this sort of like this thing that it's not an easy thing, but it's something that you have to keep chasing. So the ideas are fresh, you know. You know, here and there you might take a break or whatever, go do a podcast, you know.
Yeah, and it's easy. Yeah,
And then
it's
go back
easy.
to the studio
Right.
and hit it, you know. It's nice.
So, what's coming up as far as exhibition, or is there anything on the horizon like that?
So these mounts I'm making them specifically for, because it's a body of work, a new body of work for me, and it's for this gallery. It's a non-profit space by the Long Beach Arts Council. So it's in downtown Long Beach. I don't know the name
Sure.
of the gallery.
Yeah.
But I'm doing something for that space. My work is at the Riverside Museum of Art right now, and in September it's going to be at the Fuller Craft in Massachusetts. And then in 2019 it's going to be a work year. Like I have to just make a bunch of work and accumulate work for the CAFAM Biennale in 20, and then the work that it's made there, it's that work or new work will go to Houston for a solo exhibition the same year in the summer. So as it is, I have a full plate already.
Yeah.
Like,
So
you know what I mean? It's
your work into at least 2 years into the future right now.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, it's great because I don't, you know, I could just keep going with the momentum of not turning off. I have to respond basically, right? So I have to have work. So, and it's good to have these deadlines, you know, because it's like, okay, like in this meeting today, I was looking at my calendar like, oh shit, like I'm leaving tomorrow, and then I'm coming back on the 14th, and then I have like 3 weeks to like put something together. And luckily, like this work is quick on purpose, you know, and it's new to me, it's experimental, and so that's gonna, I don't know how that's gonna turn out, but I'm excited about that work. It's quite gestural, and it's really liberating from the other modality that I do when I take a month to do a piece. You know, with these I'm not, because it's a different animal, the pit firing.
Yeah.
And I don't measure anything. It's just all by chance, you know.
Yeah.
Some pieces do break,
Or by feeling. It's like a chef in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's like cooking, exactly. And they look like meat too. The pieces are red. Yeah, so that's what I'm cooking.
So
right
wow,
now.
so like a ton of stuff coming up, exciting things just happening, just busting. So I don't know if you're aware of this part. If we made you very aware, but we have a couple segments at the end of the show, and one of them that we call side hustles is just all about like jobs that you have to do to make it as an artist. Maybe it was stuff that you did early on, maybe it's now, maybe it's whatever, but whatever you want to say about, like, did you ever have that wild or hilarious or like, what am I doing here job, or or what do you do now to keep the lights on, or whatever?
So now I teach, and but I wouldn't consider that a hustle, because like I take that like really serious, you know what I mean? Like I think it's a huge responsibility, you know. And so I teach here in Long Beach City College, but I'm trying to create like this hub of other artists, that for other artists to come and work in the studio. So this year I have like 10 people come and work in the studio, you know, that are making work. Joaquim Joanen just made his whole body of work for Richard Heller here in the studio. And so the students were there, you know.
Yeah,
and
what
then,
an amazing opportunity for the students,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. And then, you know, I'm showing slide presentations sometimes, and then they're like, and you know, I look at the image and say, does this look familiar to you guys? They're like, oh wait, is that? Oh,
Yeah, that's on the rack out there right now. Yeah.
And so, because
well, it brings it home in a very real way for them, where they're just like, that's gonna be in a museum in a minute.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
And they're like, so I'm, and these are beginning students that have never touched clay before, right? And
Yeah.
I'm showing them a method, like this is how you do the coils, and you press it this way and you tap it that way.
Mhm.
And this piece was made that way. And then they look to the left, and it's the artist is there working with his headphones next to the students, and they're like, oh shit, like, wow, it's like it blows their mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I have artists that are coming to the studio, because for clay you need the facilities, you need kilns. And I think this
Yeah.
year or last year, I can't remember, yeah, last year I got like $164,000 worth of kilns and more equipment after that.
That's amazing.
And so with the idea of creating this place for students and artists and everything in between to make work happen.
I don't know if you're aware by any chance of Eduardo Sarabia.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You
Yeah, yeah.
you probably might even know
He's
him.
from Mexico. Yeah.
Well, actually from LA, but
Oh, really?
he's working in Mexico.
He's working
right
in
now.
Mexico,
he went
right?
back
Yeah.
to Guadalajara,
Okay.
and he's actually like doing I believe he's working in both New York and Guadalajara right now. Yeah, and so a lot of the issues and things that you were bringing up, as far as like people, pushing the medium forward, really
Yeah.
is what I think you're
Yeah,
talking about. Is
I think so.
like, he's one of those guys, and is using imagery on the vessels that are like, evoking, cartel type imagery, and dealing with, issues of, that are like important to LA and Mexico at the same time in an interesting way,
Mhm.
and that's like, yeah. If you if you guys have never hung out, I'd love to see you guys just kick it
Man,
and just
like,
talk.
that guy was based in Mexico, but if you get in touch with him, if he needs, if he wants to make some huge piece, he could come and make it in our studio. You know what I mean? Like, that would be awesome. Like,
that would be wild, right?
yeah, that would be that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
never
that's
know.
what I'm talking about.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so lastly, if you would like to, who would you want to nominate to be on our podcast? That would be like an artist that you would like to hear from. You're like, that guy's interesting, or that whoever.
This is a tough one because there's so many people doing
There's
so
so
many
many.
interesting things here in LA. It's
Yeah.
like, fuck. But one person that comes to mind who I went to school with, we took a class with Guillermo Gomez Peña, and I think that was his beginning of his performance pieces. And I think I went to one of the first pieces, and there were only like 2 or 3 people there at 6 in the morning after like Thanksgiving or whatever,
Wow.
in Elysian Park.
Yeah.
And now, like, there's like 250 people that can't get in the Mocha to see his performance because he's blown up. He's because he's so. Every time you see a performance, it's such a gift, and you walk away like, what the fuck? Like, it's like, it's something that can't really be described with words. But Rafa Esparza, definitely, he's local. He's from he's here from LA. He's everywhere, but Rafa's always doing something interesting.
Yeah, I'm intimidated. I'll be honest.
By Rafa?
Yeah.
He's super sweet. Super sweet guy.
I've never met him before.
He's super sweet. He's the homie. In clay, one person that comes to mind, she was my mentor. She was one of my teachers, Kristen Morgan. And in a similar fashion to, when you look at, so when I was at UCLA one day, I had all this theory and all this shit in my head. I was like, my head was spinning. And I went down to Mark Sullivan, which was on Wilshire at the time. And she had a show of her cello pieces on fire clay with cement. And it's like everything disappeared around me because that experience of looking at the work was so intense.
Mhm.
And I was just staring at the thing for like more than an hour. It's like no one was around. Like, felt like no one was around me. But seeing her work in person, and she's a devoted, super hardcore devoted to her practice artist. She's in Gardena, and so she's definitely a person to look
Cool,
to see. And of course Julia Half Candle, she's so playful with her work. Her work is so she just makes it seem so fun,
Yeah.
and it's not easy, you know what
No,
I'm saying?
yeah, making it look easy, right?
But the gesture in her work is just like, so it's like a perfect sketch, you know what I mean? It's like when you do a sketch before you do a drawing, that sketch is perfect sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that her work is like a sketch,
But it has that immediacy.
But it has that immediacy, fucking visceral, you know. And Julia's super sweet. You shouldn't be intimidated by Julia.
Okay. That's a me thing. I get intimidated by really good artists easy.
And someone that's also doing interesting things is Tania Guiniga. She's also local. She actually moved close to my neighborhood. Tania Guiniga, she's always doing something interesting too with different mediums. So those are a few people that I could think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's more than we can handle homework wise.
Yeah.
We're still trying to be out here, like making a living and getting all these people recorded. It's a daunting project. I don't know if we understood what we were
You guys
we
are
were
doing
doing.
really good, I think. You guys are doing really good.
We didn't know what we were doing. we were just out here making it up.
You guys are the pros, man.
No. All right, so thanks very much to Gerardo Monterrubio. That was an amazing interview, and thanks for bearing with us on the air traffic noises. Up above here at Art Traffic, we have car traffic, we have air traffic, we have all forms of traffic, and we traffic art on all traffic, if that makes sense. So you can see Gerardo's work coming up at, I believe it's the Collaborative, which is the Long Beach Arts Council exhibition space. That's a cool space too for any of artists out there from Long Beach. What you can do for that is you can basically just enter the artist registry, and then they curate from that registry. So if you're an artist that lives in Long Beach, super cool program. And then you can see his work at Riverside Museum of Art, and in September at Fuller Craft in Massachusetts, which sounds fancy. Sounds awesome. So thanks again to Gerardo. Thank you for listening to us at Art Traffic. If you have any suggestions for us that you would like, artists that you would like to hear from, shout us out at on Instagram at ArtTrafficLA, or at our Gmail, which is arttrafficpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.